Finding the widow feeding his old parents, the millionaire cowboy did something that changed her life. The sun was slowly going down behind the wide Texas plains. The sky was orange and gold, and the wind carried dust across the empty road. Ethan Cole rode his horse at a calm pace, his eyes fixed ahead. Ethan was known as a rich cowboy. He owned large lands, many cattle, and one of the biggest ranches in the area. People respected him, but they also kept their distance. He was a quiet man. He spoke only when needed and trusted very few people. That evening, he took a road he did not usually take. As he rode past an old wooden cabin, something caught his attention. The cabin looked weak and worn. The paint was peeling, and the roof looked like it had not been fixed in years. Normally, Ethan would pass by without a second look, but this time he slowed down. Through the open window, he saw something that made him stop his horse. Inside the small cabin, a young woman stood near a table. Her clothes were simple and old, but clean. Her face looked tired, yet calm. On the table was a small plate of food, barely enough for one person. But she was not alone. Two elderly people sat across from her. Their faces were pale, and their hands shook slightly. They looked weak, like they had not eaten enough for many days. Ethan watched quietly. The young woman gently pushed the plate toward the old couple. "You should eat first," she said softly. "But what about you, Clara?" one of the old people asked. "I'm not hungry," she replied with a small smile. Ethan could tell she was lying. She stepped back and watched them eat, not touching the food herself. Her eyes showed care, but also deep worry. She tried to hide it, but it was clear. Ethan frowned slightly. He had seen many people in his life. He had seen workers struggle, and he had seen people ask for help. But this felt different. This woman was not asking for anything. She was giving everything she had, even when she had almost nothing. He stayed there for a few moments, watching in silence. The wind moved softly around him, but he did not notice it. His mind was fixed on what he had just seen. After a while, he gently pulled the reins and moved his horse forward again. But something inside him felt uneasy. As he rode back toward his ranch, the image of the cabin stayed in his mind. The young woman, Clara. The way she smiled, even when she was clearly struggling. Ethan shook his head slightly. "It's none of my business," he muttered to himself. That was how he had always lived his life. He worked hard, built his ranch, and stayed away from other people's problems. It made things simple. But this time, it did not feel so simple. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his large house. The table in front of him was full of food, fresh bread, meat, vegetables. But he was not eating much. He kept thinking about the small plate in that cabin. He remembered how carefully Clara had divided the food, how she had made sure the old couple ate first. He put his fork down. For some reason, he could not enjoy his meal. "Why does this bother me?" he asked quietly. He had everything, more than enough. Yet that small moment had stayed with him longer than anything else that day. Outside, the night grew darker. The wind became stronger, making a soft sound against the windows. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the land he owned. It stretched far into the distance, but for the first time in a long while, it did not feel enough. Meanwhile, in the small cabin, Clara cleaned the empty plates. The old couple sat quietly, looking a little stronger after eating. "Thank you, child," the old man said gently. Clara smiled. "It's nothing," she replied. But when she turned away, her smile slowly faded. She looked at the empty food shelf. There was almost nothing left. Tomorrow would be another hard day. She took a deep breath and stayed calm. She had promised herself she would not give up, no matter how difficult life became. She walked outside for a moment and looked at the dark sky. There was no one to help her, no one she could ask, but she still hoped. Somehow, things would change. Far away, Ethan stood by his window, looking into the same dark sky. Neither of them knew it yet, but that small moment on a dusty road had already begun to change something that would soon bring their lives together. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the wide land. The air was cool, and the sky was clear. Ethan Cole stood outside his ranch house, holding a cup of coffee, but his mind was not at peace. He had slept very little. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same scene again, the small cabin, the weak old couple, and Clara giving away her food without a second thought. Ethan was not used to thinking this way. He had trained himself to focus only on his work. Problems of others were not his concern. That was the rule he had lived by for years. But now, that rule felt broken. He put his cup down and called one of his workers. "Tom," he said, "do you know anything about the old cabin near the East Road?" Tom nodded. "Yes, sir. That place belongs to the Hayes family." Ethan listened carefully. "The young woman there is Clara Hayes," Tom continued. Her husband passed away last year. Since then, she has been taking care of his parents. They are both very old and weak. Ethan stayed silent. She works hard, Tom added. But life has not been easy for her. She doesn't ask for help. Many people tried to offer, but she refused. Why? Ethan asked. Tom shrugged. Pride maybe, or maybe she just wants to stand on her own. Ethan nodded slowly. All right, you can go. As Tom walked away, Ethan stood there, thinking deeply. He respected people who worked hard. He respected strength. And what he saw in Clara was not weakness. It was strength, quiet, but powerful. Still, something did not feel right. That afternoon, Ethan rode his horse again. This time, he did not pretend it was by chance. He chose the same dusty road on purpose. He stopped at a distance, hidden behind a few trees. From there, he could see the cabin clearly. Clara was outside carrying a heavy bucket of water. Her steps were slow, but she did not stop. She placed the bucket down, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and went back for another one. Ethan watched closely. After that, she started chopping wood. The axe looked heavy in her hands, but she kept going. Each strike was careful, not wasted. Inside the cabin, the old couple sat quietly, watching her through the window. There was worry on their faces. Ethan felt something strange in his chest. He had workers for everything: water, wood, cattle. He had never thought about doing all these things alone. But Clara was doing everything by herself. As the sun moved higher, her pace slowed. She looked tired, but she did not stop. Ethan tightened his grip on the reins. Why doesn't she ask for help? He thought. He could easily send someone. He could solve her problems in a single day. But he remembered what Tom had said. She would refuse. That evening, Ethan went into town. It was a small place where everyone knew each other. As he walked past the general store, he heard two men talking. That girl won't last long like this, one man said. She's too stubborn, the other replied. Help is there, but she won't take it. Ethan stopped for a moment, but did not join the conversation. Instead, he walked into the store. The shopkeeper greeted him. Good evening, Mr. Cole. Ethan nodded. Then he asked, Does Clara Hayes come here often? The shopkeeper sighed. She comes, but not much anymore. She buys very little, only what she must. Ethan looked around the store, shelves full of food, supplies, everything a person could need. Yet, just a few miles away, someone was struggling to survive. He felt uneasy again. That night, Ethan sat alone once more. But this time, he did not try to ignore his thoughts. He spoke quietly to himself. If she won't accept help, then help must come in another way. It was a new idea for him. Ethan was not a man who played games or hid his actions. He was direct and clear. But this situation was different. He leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. What does she need? He asked himself. Not charity, not pity. She needed a way to stand strong without feeling weak. A small plan began to form in his mind. Meanwhile, at the cabin, Clara sat beside the old couple. She had managed to prepare a small meal again. Not enough, but she made it work. After they finished eating, she stepped outside. The night was quiet. The stars were bright above her. She looked tired, more than before, but her eyes still held determination. I will find a way, she whispered to herself. She did not know that someone had already started thinking of a way. Far away, Ethan stood near his window again, looking toward the dark land where the small cabin stood. This time, his mind was clear. He was no longer just watching. He was ready to act. And that decision would soon change everything. The next morning, Ethan Cole woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still dark and the air was cold, but his mind was clear. He had made his decision. Ethan was not the kind of man who liked to wait. Once he decided something, he acted on it. But this time, he had to be careful. Clara Hayes was not someone who would accept direct help. If he simply walked to her door and offered money or supplies, she would refuse. He was sure of that. So, he chose a different way. After breakfast, Ethan called Tom again. I have some work that needs to be done near the East Road, Ethan said calmly. Tom looked surprised. Near that old cabin, sir? Ethan nodded. Yes, the fences there need repair, and I want someone to take care of it daily. Tom thought for a moment. We can send one of the workers. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, I want to offer the work to Clara Hayes. Tom raised his eyebrows. Do you think she will agree? Ethan gave a small, confident look. It's not charity, it's work. She won't refuse work. Tom smiled. That might work, sir. Make sure the payment is fair, Ethan added. More than fair. Tom nodded and left to carry out the order. Later that day, Tom rode to the small cabin. Clara was outside again, fixing a broken wooden chair. When she saw him, she stood up, a little unsure. "Good afternoon," Tom said kindly. "Good afternoon," Clara replied. Tom explained the job. "Mr. Cole needs someone to repair and maintain fences near this area. It's steady work. He is willing to pay well." Clara listened quietly. For a moment, she did not speak. Then she asked, "Why me?" Tom smiled gently. "Because you live nearby, and because you are known as a hard worker." Clara looked down at her hands. Work was something she understood. Work was something she could accept. "I will do it," she said finally. Tom nodded. "Good. You can start tomorrow." As Tom rode away, Clara stood there thinking. It felt strange. Opportunities like this did not come easily, but she pushed her doubts aside. "This is what I need," she told herself. Meanwhile, Ethan waited back at his ranch. He tried to stay busy, but his thoughts kept returning to the cabin. By evening, Tom returned with the news. "She accepted," Tom said with a smile. Ethan felt a quiet sense of relief. "Good," he replied simply. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, Clara started working on the fences. The work was hard, but she did not complain. She fixed broken wood, tied loose wires, and made sure everything was strong again. Ethan watched from a distance sometimes. He noticed how serious she was about her work. She did not rush. She did not take shortcuts. Even when she looked tired, she kept going. "She is stronger than most people I know," he thought. At the end of the first week, Clara received her payment. It was more than she expected. She counted the money twice, her eyes filled with surprise. "This is too much," she said softly, but she had earned it. She had worked honestly. That evening, she went to the town store. For the first time in many weeks, she was able to buy enough food, fresh bread, vegetables, and even a little extra. The shopkeeper smiled warmly. "It's good to see you again, Clara." She smiled back, though her eyes still showed a little confusion. Something was changing, and she could feel it. Days passed, and small things continued to improve. The fences kept her busy, and the steady payment helped her take care of the old couple. They looked a little healthier now. Their faces had more color, and their voices were stronger. But Clara was not someone who ignored details. She began to notice things. The work seemed too perfect, too close to her home. The payment was too generous, and every time she asked who suggested her name, the answer was always unclear. One evening, as the sun was setting, Clara stood near the fence she had just repaired. She looked across the land and saw a rider in the distance. It was Ethan. He had not planned to be seen, but this time, their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Clara felt a sudden understanding. It was him. He was the reason behind all of this. She put down her tools and slowly walked toward him. Ethan remained where he was, calm but ready. When she reached him, she spoke directly. "Was this your doing?" she asked. Ethan looked at her for a moment. He did not lie. "Yes," he said simply. Clara's face showed mixed emotions, surprise, confusion, and a little bit of anger. "I don't accept charity," she said firmly. Ethan nodded. "I know. This work, this money, it's too much." "You earned it," Ethan replied calmly. "I only gave you a chance." Clara looked at him carefully. There was no pity in his eyes, no judgment, only respect. "I don't need help," she said again, though her voice was softer now. Ethan spoke quietly. "Everyone needs a chance. That's all this is." Clara stood silent. For the first time, she did not feel like someone was trying to save her. Instead, she felt seen. The wind moved gently around them as the sun disappeared behind the hills. That moment was the beginning of something new, and neither of them fully understood yet how much it would change their lives. The wind was soft that evening, and the sky was painted in warm colors as the sun slowly went down. Clara stood quietly near the fence, thinking about her conversation with Ethan. His words stayed in her mind. Everyone needs a chance. She had always believed in standing on her own. She had faced every problem alone, without asking for help. But what Ethan offered did not feel like charity. It felt different. It felt like respect. Over the next few days, Clara continued her work, but something inside her had changed. She no longer felt like she was only trying to survive. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small sense of hope. The old couple also began to improve. With better food and less worry, they slowly gained strength. They smiled more. They talked more. The cabin, once quiet and heavy, now felt a little warmer. One morning, as Clara was preparing breakfast, the old woman looked at her gently. "You don't have to carry everything alone, child," she said. Clara paused. "I know," she replied softly. And this time, she truly meant it. Later that day, Ethan rode out again, but this time he did not stay far away. He stopped near the cabin, unsure if he should approach. Before he could decide, Clara stepped outside and saw him. For a moment, they both stood still. Then Clara walked toward him. "You don't have to stay at a distance," she said calmly. Ethan gave a small nod and rode closer. "I wasn't sure if you would want to see me," he admitted. Clara looked at him, her expression steady. "I was upset at first," she said honestly. "But now I understand." Ethan listened quietly. "You didn't try to make me feel weak," she continued. "You gave me work, not pity." Ethan's voice was calm. "You never needed pity." Clara allowed a small smile to appear. For the first time, their conversation felt easy. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, things began to change even more. Ethan started visiting more often, sometimes to check on the fences, sometimes just to talk. He spoke little, as always, but Clara understood his quiet nature. She too spoke simply, but her words carried strength. Together, they found a balance. Ethan also made sure more work was available, not just for Clara, but for others in the area who were struggling. Without making it obvious, he created small opportunities that allowed people to earn, not depend. The town began to notice the change. "That ranch owner has a different way of helping," people said. But Ethan never spoke about it. He did not need recognition. For him, something deeper had changed. One evening, as the sun was setting again, Clara stood outside the cabin, looking at the land around her. It was still simple, still small, but it no longer felt like a place of struggle. It felt like a place of growth. Ethan rode up and stopped beside her. "You've done a lot with this place," he said. Clara shook her head gently. "We did." Ethan looked at her, slightly surprised. Clara continued, "You gave me a chance. I just used it." Ethan smiled faintly. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the sky. Then Clara spoke again. "You changed more than just my life," she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. "How?" Clara looked toward the cabin, where the old couple were sitting by the window, talking peacefully. "You gave them peace," she said. "And you gave me something I thought I had lost." Ethan waited. "Hope." The word stayed in the air. Ethan took a slow breath. "And you changed mine too," he said quietly. Clara looked at him, curious. "I spent years building a life," he said, "but I never thought about what it truly meant." He looked around, the land, the cabin, the quiet evening. "Now I do." Clara smiled softly. The sky slowly turned darker, and the first stars began to appear. Life was still not perfect. There would still be hard days ahead, but things were no longer the same. Clara was no longer just surviving. Ethan was no longer just watching, and the small cabin on the dusty road was no longer a place of silent struggle. It had become a place of strength, dignity, and quiet change. Sometimes it only takes one moment, one decision, to change everything. And for them, that moment had come on a simple evening, on a dusty road, when one man chose to stop and truly see.